Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to stand in front of you guys, but I invite you to participate in this opening to this session that we are all here to do together, which comprises taking a little journey into the future. If you have come to an open forum session earlier this week, earlier today, you might have traveled with me. I'm Johanna Hoffman, founder of Design for Adaptation, on a slightly similar journey to the future, but know that when we arrive, we will do a slightly different exploration than we did previously. So before we begin, I invite you to close your eyes. Take a little moment to find a comfortable position for your body, and focus on your breath, on breathing in and on breathing out. On that exhale, all of us here, you, me, everybody in this room, the people also behind me, will have traveled 25 years into the future and landed in January 2050. We're still here in Davos. We're still here in Switzerland, but we are 25 years farther ahead in time than we were just a couple of minutes ago. And you're older than you used to be. How old are you today in 2050? When you look at the mirror, how many more wrinkles do you have on your face? Or maybe you didn't have wrinkles before and now you do for the first time and you're a little freaked out because I'm older. Scary sometimes. How old are your parents? Are they still alive and with us in this 2050 reality? In this 2050, where all of us have landed and all of us are older than we used to be, this is a reality that's shaped as much by crisis, economic, geopolitical, climatic, as it is by systemic and collective adaptation to climate change. Switzerland has had a lot to do with what's happened in the past couple of decades regarding that climate action. It's emerged as a leader spearheading different advancements in renewable energy technology generation, also storage, carbon capture. Its financial sector has played a critical role in funding different international projects regarding some of those renewable energy generation initiatives, also developing a carbon-based economy, one that ties economic success to different modes of environmental conservation, adaptation, mitigation. And the nation itself has been adapting to different climate impacts, including glacial retreat, also a lot of shifting weather patterns. Winter here is not as cold as it used to be. And as it does that, it's also invested in different water reclamation initiatives, different kinds of vertical farming initiatives to address issues of food security, and also different fire-resistant infrastructure. It's a lot drier here, and fire has also become an issue as it has in more arid parts of the world. It does all of that while grappling with a growing array of political tensions that hasn't gone away in 2050. Also an influx of climate refugees, and other challenges that come with trying to balance adaptation with economic success, what Switzerland has definitely been focusing on a lot. Davos and other villages in some of these mountainous valleys close by has become a kind of showcase town. So tourists and visitors are encouraged to come and see what's going on, not just for the biking, for the hiking, some of the occasional winter sports that are still possible, given the ways in which climate has become warmer here, but also to see what Switzerland is doing to address the climate crisis. So if you'd like to see a video of what this looks like, you can open your eyes. Feel free to keep them closed as well. And now's the time to bring up that video. Thank you. Because energy, water, and waste are linked. Davos and its regional leaders have invested in different resource management systems where recycling, desalination, and waste treatment serve as both water and energy resource reclamation hubs. And the town itself has doubled down on some familiar regeneration, solar creation initiatives like decentralized solar panels, as well as geothermal power through the form of decentralized heat pumps. And it's also explored some newer ones. Streets are embedded with piezoelectric energy capturing systems that transfer kinetic energy from people walking, driving, and biking into energy that's stored and used within the local grid. Hydropower and wind are cultivated through different sectors of the valley, creating a town and different towns in the region that have become a widely visited and marketable vision of what municipal spaces in this climate change age can become. So that's a little bit about what's happening in Switzerland. That's a little bit about what's happening in Davos. What's happening in the place where you live? What's happening in the place that you consider to be home, that you're most connected to in this world? If you opened your eyes previously, now is a good time to close them again. You can bring up the soundscape a little louder as well. What kind of technologies and infrastructural systems to support those technologies are in place where you live? Are there power lines visible when you're walking down the street? In your region, your community, is there geothermal power maybe? Are there heat pumps? Is that how you're getting warm in the cooler months of the winter? How are energy generation initiatives where you live funded? Is Switzerland bringing a lot of money in? Is there a different kind of funding mechanism that's going on? And how is power managed? Is it more of a collective enterprise? Is there a local government who's managing what's going on? Do you have an ownership stake, perhaps, in how energy is cultivated, generated, and transferred? Or is it all privatized? How are people interacting with energy? When you plug something into an outlet, or you come into your house at night and it's dark, and you turn on a switch, is power guaranteed to be there when you want it to be? Or is it maybe something that's limited at certain times of day or certain times of the week or certain times of year? Because there's an understanding that maybe energy is harder to generate, harder to store, and therefore needs to be used in a different sort of way. If distribution of energy, if the use of it is maybe more just and equitable than what you considered it to be back in 2025, why might that have happened? Were there different policies that were put in place? Were there different sorts of community or organizational pushback against some of the powers that be that shifted things in a direction that made it more equitable? And what's your role in this energy future? Are you maybe generating power at your home through something like decentralized solar panels, through a different initiative, storing it on site, giving it back to your local grid? Are you someone who's maybe pushing for policies regarding how energy is generated and used within the place that you call home? This is a short visit to 2050. We're going to wrap up our time here. So stop whatever kinds of reflection, exploration you've been doing, and take another breath, a big breath in, and a big breath out. On that exhale, all of us will have traveled very quickly, very safely, very successfully. No one has been lost on the way back to January 2025. We all made it. I'm very impressed. Reflecting on what we just experienced with that short exploration of what life is like in 2050, what came up for you? What kind of visions did you maybe see? Any sounds that you maybe heard? Turn to the person next to you and share just one thing that struck or stuck with you. It can be a word, it can be a feeling. How did it feel to live in that vision of 2050? To explore that renewable energy future where places like Switzerland have really invested in technologically intensive ways of generating, storing energy, addressing a lot of how we power our lives. Did that resonate for you? Maybe you didn't like that. No, too much technology, we need to do something else. So as our time together draws to a close, I want to say, if you found this work interesting, maybe it was frustrating, you thought it was a waste of time, maybe this was interesting, maybe this was fun, provocative, whatever the response you had to it was, know that this is a way of translating what can so often seem impersonal and abstract about the future into more high-resolution, tangible reality. Because the more that we can make futures feel real, feel personal, be places where we and other people like us will live, the more we can refine our capacities to identify and work towards the futures we actually want to experience. We can do that work individually, and critically, we can do that work more effectively together. So again, I'm Johanna Hoffman, founder of Design for Adaptation. Thank you so much for taking this little journey into what 2050 might be, and I hope you would enjoy this panel with this really amazing group of people. Thank you.
And good afternoon. I think Johanna gave us a fantastic open space in this open forum. We're delighted to be here. I'm John Defterios. I'm a senior fellow at the World Economic Forum. I think I've outdone everybody on the panel. This is my 34th forum, but I haven't had a chance to do the open forum for probably the last 20 years. This is a crucial subject in this 21st century. Because it's extraordinary with all the interconnectivity. Everybody has a phone in here. Our lights are working. Great visual displays. And in the 21st century, we still have nearly 1 billion people living without electricity today. The official number is 675 million people, right? So just under 10% of the world's population can't turn on a light switch. Better than 2 billion people don't have clean cooking facilities. That's extraordinary in itself. And we're wrestling with what we call the energy trilemma. So energy that's accessible in this era of climate change, sustainable, and number 3, which is very crucial for that 675 million plus people, it's hard to get an accurate number on it, is it affordable, right? And that's what we want to cover here today. To manage your expectations, we're going to have a conversation amongst ourselves here for 40 minutes, and we want to open the floor to your questions, which are really critical. I'm delighted to see a full room, but a very diverse room, both in age and from different corners of the world. And that's the same for this panel. I just want to introduce them quickly. Stefanie Ólives is a global shaper from Brazil. She works in the energy sector, and she'll explain. There's a population of better than 200 million people, major oil and gas producer in the G20, but still energy access is a challenge. Joyeeta Gupta is a professor of environment and development in the global south at the University of Amsterdam. Very strong views on this issue of energy equity, which is absolutely crucial today. Gill Scheltjens is CEO of Decarbon from Belgium. He's an innovator when it comes to carbon capture and utilization and storage. He'll explain that in this idea of off-grid electricity with solar and wind, battery storage to get that number of nearly 1 billion people down. And Ipeleng Selele is the chairperson of Brand South Africa, which is the overall arching government initiative to raise the profile of South Africa, also G20 member of the BRICS like Brazil. She works day-to-day in the energy sector as well. Can we give them a warm welcome before we start our debate? Thanks. I had a chance to get the input from this distinguished panel to see what they wanted to focus on. And we're going to go through the first 2 rounds, and then it's an open floor for them to pick up on each other's thoughts. So I don't have to drive all the questions. And then it's vital to allow that 15 to 20 minutes to take your questions. So Stefanie, I wanted to start with you in this concept of Brazil, because I've covered energy for 25 years, when I was at CNN. That was my specialty. And we know Brazil has come on in the last decade, especially oil, gas. It's expensive to get out of the deep waters, the pre-salt oil, as they call it there. It's moving ahead, but it has natural resources. They've destroyed the forests in the past. They're doing reforestation, which is great. But what is the reality of that energy mix of the future for Brazil? Should it use those hydrocarbons? Should it bring in the sustainable energy for the future? Can you have the right balance? Because you still have citizens that don't have access to energy.
Yeah, thank you, John. Brazil has a lot of potential, of course, everyone knows it. In practical terms, I think we need still advance so much because we're not going to transition overnight, but the path to the transition needs to be clear. So I think oil companies, they need to start offsetting the emissions. It's going to be like progressive. And I really think that Brazil has a lot to do in this area still.
I'd hop to the other side of the podium here to Ipeleng because South Africa is a BRICS member, and it's struggled with access to energy and having enough energy capacity. You have rolling blackouts at different times, which you find it a struggle. Should Africans have the right to develop hydrocarbons today? They're responsible for about 1% of the carbon bank that we have around the world. Most of that comes from the United States, China, and the other G7 members. But in your view, how do you combine development and building the natural resources out for Africans to have access, and you can use a South African example, and still balance sustainability along the way in that trilemma I talked about?
Thank you so much. Thanks for that question. I think as we had a discussion earlier on, context matters. So I think a starting point for us is understanding and being in tune with our dynamics, local dynamics and nuances, because that then drives how you think and ensure that whatever solutions you come up with are actually resonant. They resonate and are compelling for our dynamics, right? Our local dynamics, which is quite important. Like, I mean, many of us do know that South Africa is a very industrialized, highly industrialized country and very diversified. Now, the approach that we are taking is that we will continue. I mean, if you look at LNG, let me use an example on the gas side. You are aware that South Africa is now going to be developing their first LNG terminal.
Liquefied natural gas for our
exactly,
audience. Yes.
LNG
Thanks.
terminal, yes. So of course, one assumes that many of us in this room would have a bit of a basic understanding of energy, but South Africa is developing its first LNG terminal in Richards Bay. And I think our view is that it's important that we have a diversified mixed. So if you look at our blueprint, an energy transition RP plan, which we call integrated resource plan, it does have a few energy sources that we have to use, that we believe we have to use for different reasons, because you also need base load, right, to be able to augment your other energy sources. So on the LNG side, we are developing that. And I think also, as you are aware, I mean, we have been rolling out quite a few renewable energy projects. And in fact, one can assume or claim that we are at the forefront of it, because we are now into around 8. And it has been very successful, but of course there are lessons that can be learned from that. And for obvious reasons, as you said, we've got our own natural resources. I mean, we've got the sun, we've got the land, so why not at least take advantage of that? And I think we are. So I think to your point, to answer your question, yes, we are taking advantage of our own natural resources, but we also are ensuring that we look at other energy sources such as gas. Of course, I gave you an example earlier on to say it's one thing to talk about modernizing the grid and transmission, but it's another to be cognizant of the fact that we do need clean cooking. So whilst we talk big and we're at the highest level, when you understand that the bulk of your population is poor, and we're talking about eradicating energy poverty, we'll have to look at other energy sources that can give, at least, or enable the bulk of our poor people access to that affordable energy. And of course, it might not be 100% clean, but we have to start somewhere, which is why we say it's a just, and therefore it means it's a journey. And we started off, of course, with clean cooking, training our communities. We started with LPG gas. We knew we'll go into LNG gas, and we are ready now. And we already are starting to pilot also projects in the green hydrogen space. So for us, and I think I said this to you earlier on, this is a very complex journey.
Yeah.
It requires very sober minds, right? From a leadership perspective, we're going to have to take a step back because it can be very overwhelming. So for us, we're taking a very sober approach. Even from a load shedding perspective, I'm sure many of you would have read that it has been more than 300 days that we've never had load shedding. And I think that is commendable. And it speaks to what? Great leadership, a very sober mind, be methodical about how you go about it. When you look at Eskom, our utility entity, we are no longer dealing with load shedding. And that is a story of the past. And I'm very confident, of course, in our leadership. So being sober is quite important. And I think we've got a lot of proof points that can tell you that we are taking that approach.
Good. You said we have to be sober. If, for those in the room, you probably saw the report 2 weeks ago from Copernicus here in Europe, which is involved with the weather reporting and climate reporting. 2024 was the warmest on record in the industrial age, 1.6 degrees centigrade. The target to go to 2050 is to cap global warming at 1.5. So it is alarming that we've gone at that level of 1.6. Doesn't mean we can't capture it back with a very sober approach, right? And what I think you're talking about with energy justice, Mozambique, Tanzania, Senegal, Nigeria, Mauritania have these natural gas supplies. And there's been some dictating from the global north telling the global south, you can't have access to that natural gas. And the global south says, look, we're not responsible for the carbon emissions we have today. We're not responsible for the panic that we're in today. We need access to energy. So Joyeeta, this is your specialty, right? You balance development, right, with climate and this justice. How do you see this when you know the world is heating? We're behind the curve. We want to see action, but people need to have access to energy to power progress.
So I'd like to make 2 points over here. The first point is that 1.5 is the safe boundary, because beyond 1.5, we can trigger all kinds of tipping elements, and then it becomes irreversible. But actually, 1 degree is the just boundary. And 1 degree makes sure that less than 1% of the global population is affected today. So with 1.5, you already have a huge amount of damage. So that makes it a really big problem. So you have a boundary like this. We are outside the safe and just boundary because we've just crossed 1.5, at least temporarily. And we have not yet met minimum needs. And he basically said that a certain percentage of the global population is not getting access to energy, but you need energy for not only your lights, but for your food, for your water, for also your little transport or your house. So you need energy for more things than just a light in your house. So the question that we have is, if you're outside the boundary and you haven't met minimum needs, this basically means that theoretically, if you want to go back into the boundary space, you need to meet minimum needs with renewables, or with something that doesn't cause greenhouse gas emissions. Now, that's the first story, because otherwise we are going to go way outside. The second part of the story is that 78% of the remaining fossil fuel is in the global south. And the global north has waited for 25 years before adopting the target, and this gave them the time to slowly wind up their fossil fuel use till they don't have that much left. But basically, the problem now is that if you want to close down fossil fuel in the global south, you're going to basically force them not to use their resources and make them bear the burden of the sacrifice of both not using the fossil fuel and of facing the damages caused by climate change. So it's a double-edged sword for developing countries. And I think that we have to make sure that the global north helps the developing countries enter the energy transformation rapidly, because the more you invest now in the gas or in individual processes before you shift to renewables, you really get stuck in a lock-in and you can't get out of that. And so the global north really has to spend money both to clean up its own act overnight practically, as well as to help developing countries make that shift without high interest loans. So it really has to be a no interest loan if you really want it to happen. So we're really talking about a revolution.
Yeah, and and we're moving slowly. Gill, you're an innovator, in fact, have been awarded for your work in decarbonization. And I'd like to have you bring it up afterwards, carbon capture and utilizing that capture of emissions and then using it for energy. But can you talk about this because we had COP 29 in Baku. I was attending COP 28 in the UAE, where they came up with this consensus, to triple renewable capacity by 2030, reduce emissions by 43%, triple nuclear energy, which is seen as clean energy today, by 2035. You had 28 countries sign on to this agreement to move forward. But we've seemed to slip into this idea of accepting adaptation as the only solution. And we have a lot of young people in the audience. And I don't think we should be giving up. And I think innovations is crucial. But the collaboration that both Joyeeta and Ipeleng were talking about, that we need to help the Global South in this transition, we can't be lulled into saying this is just reality today. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that it's a huge honor for me to be here, and it's a pleasure to see so many young people here. It's very inspiring also for me to see that we're backed up by these young potentials. You're absolutely right. So I was selected as a top innovator by the World Economic Forum. And actually at Decarbon, what we have developed is a very simple process where we are splitting the CO2 molecule back to its original building block, making CO2 active again, and resupplying that to the petrochemical industry that are now using these building blocks based on oil and gas, or coal even. The biggest problem here is that if we are basing these building blocks on oil and gas, it's actually a burden on the environment. That's one thing. The advantage that we have is that our solution is electrified. And that's also the main reason why I'm here today, is because I see a huge opportunity to collaborate with the Global South. The Global South has a huge competitive advantage over the Global North, and that is, it's very simple. It's more sun. The sun shines for more hours in a year in the Global South. And that's a big competitive advantage that cannot be beaten. Yes. You cannot influence this. And so my take to this is that there has to be some sort of collaboration here. And I do believe, and this is really my personal opinion, is that if we can have a buy-in, an industrial buy-in in the Global South by the Global North, then all these domestic issues, they will be solved. Because I believe that the industrial relevance, if that proceeds, then the domestic solutions will follow. That is my personal opinion here. But of course, there's some challenges that are being faced. I had a long discussion with the CEO of Easy Solar. This is a company that is developing green projects in the Global South. And although they have this competitive advantage, we see that the investments are being delayed. And the main reason for this is actually the instability in the regions. And I think if we can collaborate, so hand in hand, finding a win-win between the North and the South, I think we can overcome these hurdles and really make a difference.
Good, thank you for that. And I want to go to some solutions, right? And I'll turn to Stefanie in a moment on that. For context, at the last COP 29, the target for this loss and damage fund to take some of the wealth from the Global North to the Global South, the original target was to have a fund of $1.3 trillion that would be invested in projects that Stefanie's been talking about, Joyeeta and Ipeleng, right? Or the solar that Gill's talking about. And they argued, and I knew the negotiator, and I had a conversation with him in the last 3 weeks. He said it almost collapsed because the Global North did not want to give more than $300 billion. So it was less than 1/4 of the target. They argued to the very last hour. At the previous COP, they thought they had an agreement, and they landed on $300 billion, and it's not even concrete when that money is going to be put in for the Global South.
And who?
And who, right? So can you pick up on this, and then I'll come back to Stefanie, Joyeeta. This is a stalemate, and we're pretending like we can push it to the next COP as if climate change, stops for the negotiators. And that's the real frustration, I think, for all of you on this panel.
I've been following the climate negotiations for the last 35 years, right from 1989, before the negotiations began. And every now and then you see that the developing countries ask for money and the rich countries say, okay, we'll set up a fund. And then they set up an executive and these executives get paid. And then there are some rules and then they make some progress on that, but it's minute. Then again, there's a request for more money and it's just putting the money in the same budget, in that same fund. They start a new fund with new people, with new rules, and this has been going on since for the last 35 years. And every time the developing countries ask for money, what I see from the global north is that there are very few countries actually paying. It's basically 15, 16 countries that are paying. So these countries then try to change the name of the game. So what happens is money moves from one area to another. It was development assistance, then it gets relabeled as climate assistance. And I sent a student to Nepal once to see an adaptation project, which turned out to be simply giving drinking water, which was not really adaptation. So basically what you're seeing is money gets relabeled. And in the way the money is offered nowadays, there is no clarity as to who is going to pay, how they're going to pay, when they're going to pay, under what circumstances. Is it going to be a grant? Is it going to be a loan? Is it going to be together with the private sector, which is going to lend on market rates? So basically, the story that I hear politically is a really complicated and messy story where all you see is a global north resisting any demand to pay up. And the reason they don't want to pay up is because once you start to pay up, you might have to pay up for the next 1,000 years because the impacts of climate change will be there for the next 1,000 years.
That's a long time horizon.
It's a long time horizon, and that is one of the reasons why they don't want to start paying. On the other hand, if you don't pay, you won't solve the problem. And it is the global north that will suffer as well as the global south.
Good. There's another issue here for Europe and also the United States. It's linked to migration because it's getting so hot in Africa. That you have climate migrants, right, that need to move to where they can live, right, because they're not working. Before I bring Stefanie back in, Ipeleng, can you talk about the other thing that's very complex is that if people want to if African companies want to borrow and work with the governments, the cost to do so in the global south is so much higher than you could borrow here in Switzerland, right? And then there's the erratic nature of the currency markets. If an economy is not doing well, the currency drops in value, so an investor would have lost that 25, 30, 50% of their investment based on currency protection. So what's the most effective way for the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the African Development Bank, the BRICS Bank, the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, to support the global north, to deploy the capital? Because you're just accumulating more debt trying to deploy renewable energy or energy for access for Africans. How complicated is it, Ipeleng?
Well, it's very complicated, and hence I continue to say you've got to be very sober. You must be in tune of your context, and when you arrive at the negotiation table, it must suit us. It's not about them, it's about us. And I think what's also important is to acknowledge that we also have other creative ways of funding some of our projects. Again, because we are in tune, because we understand our own situation. So what we're doing in South Africa is that we are lucky in many ways in South Africa, because as you know, we're part of the G20, we're also part of the BRICS. So we belong to many other constituencies, and hence we've got to be very intentional and strategic in terms of us yielding the results of at least ensuring that we achieve our objectives. So we've got at least developmental DFIs, right? Developmental finance institutions. We also have the biggest sovereign fund in Africa, the PIC, which obviously comes from our pension money. And also we have many other grants institutions that are able to support particularly up-and-coming industrialists. And in South Africa, as you know, we're not apologetic because of our history. So we are intentional in ensuring that you've got to be able to also support Black-owned industrialists. So in South Africa, we're very clear, very unapologetic. If you listen to my president yesterday addressing the attendees at the Congress Center, we're very clear. So I think from a funding perspective, then, we are saying you are not going to impose the very same terms you're talking about that don't suit us. We don't agree to those. We really don't. We negotiate and we say, we're going to have to meet each other halfway, because you can't borrow me money, then impose on me that I must use all your companies that come from your country. What about my industrialists? So we have to then meet each other halfway. And I like what you're saying. Let us collaborate. Let us collaborate. So those terms, we always have to actually unpack them and look at them with a tooth comb, because if you don't do that, you can find yourself entangled in all sorts of terms, and you would have signed up for what? So I think what I'm really trying to say here then is to say we're cognizant of the fact that we're very fortunate. We are also, of course, if you look at our generation versus probably the older generation, because we also studied in the same business schools in INSEAD, Oxford. So look, we are also a lot smarter, where we help our elders to say, you better look at that contract because it doesn't suit us. So don't sign up for things that are not going to suit our industries on the ground. So we're much more innovative. We're saying project finance is not the only way, because you also, if you don't understand that I'm probably the first entrepreneur in my family, I might have been to INSEAD, but I'm the first entrepreneur in my family. Now, when you come and ask for collateral and balance sheet, where do I get it from? Because I'm not a trust fund baby. So context matters. So we are very much in tune of who we are, where we're coming from. All we know is that we will overcome, and we will succeed, and we will collaborate. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear it.
Can I?
Yeah, of course. And then I'm going to bring Stefanie back in.
Just to support this is, I hope that the global south does not make the same mistakes as the global north. So what I'm hearing is exactly where I think we should go to, and that is learn from the mistakes that have been made in the past, and moving forward to a more green and more sustainable future. And I think that's where the global south has the advantage as a blue ocean. So I think in terms of developing, it's much more interesting because you can learn from the mistakes. I will give a very small example, and that is in the global north, we're trying to implement green electricity, and it's more of a burden than a solution, because in the peak hours, we have over compensation. So basically, we have to shut down equipment because, and that's basically where we have to go to, decentralization of green electricity. And I think that's the type of developments where the global South can benefit from.
I agree with you. Maybe just to add to that, I think we also talk about reducing the emissions, but what's important is also talk about carbon neutrality. Yeah? Because if we understand that we're starting with carbon neutrality before I can get to net zero, that's in a just way. It's quite important. And let me give you an example. In South Africa, we have a company called Sasol. And Sasol, we've got the Fischer-Tropsch technology. Now, it means you also have gray, blue, all the others until I get to green. Now, I have to then work on this journey, because when you impose on us and you say, I must transition overnight, that's impossible, because I also have Sasol that has developed this Fischer-Tropsch technology. I actually can start with gray to get to green. That's being just.
Great. I think for the audience, let's explain. I mean, they think of coal as black in the rainbow of energy, right? Which is, very, very carbon intensive. And then you move down by taking carbon out to make it closer to the green, right? Natural gas is considered blue because it's not as damaging to the environment in terms of its carbon intensity, although there's got the complications of methane gas. But it's still seen as a blue energy. I wanted to bring Stefanie back in because you like to talk about fuels of the future, and like Ipeleng, you should say Brazil should have access to its oil and gas because it has that, is blessed with that natural resources. How does it look? And you're a shaper, which means you're a young leader for the forum in shaping the agendas of the future. So if I fast forward, as Johanna said, let's look 25 years, but let's just look 10 years out in Brazil. How do you think the energy mix should it look like to provide solutions in your view?
Brazil nowadays already have like a clean energy matrix. So we have so much potential, so much hydro power plants energy. So I think that despite all this potential, we still have regions where we don't have basically facilities for energy. So 10 years from now, I'd like to see technology being used to provide energy access to people. And for that, we need intentional investment. I mean, there is at some level investment in the global south, especially in Brazil, but it's still exploratory investment. So I see a lot of investment on expanding power generation capacity, and they build those projects and they sell those projects and they're profiting a lot. So it's not risky to invest in the global south. I think it's very profitable and is the way that we're going to build the future. So what we need from the global north now, and I would like to see this in the future, is structural investment for us to really transform urban planning for the new reality we're trying to build.
Good. What happens now? You were saying to me that you still have people are so desperate for access to energy that they take it off the grid, they steal it from the grid, and then you were saying people in Amazonia, which is a tougher terrain, or in the northeast of Brazil, it's a huge country, they still don't have access, and you're a G20 member, as you said, a member of the BRICS.
Yeah, exactly. It's a major issue in Brazil, the electricity theft in favelas and the isolated systems in Amazonia. If we use technology to solve those problems, I think microgrids and storage would be really great to give those communities autonomy, because as we all are saying, the transition is not going to happen overnight, but those people need access to energy now, and this is why we need to use technology to do it.
Good. So your argument here to this audience is like it's great to have big master plans for oil and gas development, offshore wind, which they're doing, ethanol. Brazil's a huge provider of the agricultural grains to make ethanol, which is good. Yeah. But Brazilian people in many corners of the country don't have access to electricity still, which is a challenge. Joyeeta, please.
So, you know, we were talking about decentralized renewable energy. In the global south, what you see is that the richer communities are investing in solar panels for themselves, and then they have their own little microgrid and they have their own little batteries, and then there's no one to finance the poorer people. So when the poorer communities need to have access to energy, then they have to pay for their own microgrid, and that's going to be a pretty large part of the money. So in some ways, we have to find a way in which the rich people still cross-subsidize the poor people for their access. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is a story. So in the Netherlands, we get gas, and that heats up our houses. And now we're trying to get off the gas. But there's a huge infrastructure. In every single house, you have these panels which heat up the house. But getting off the gas means that that infrastructure becomes stranded. And then a few years ago, 2019, my mother phones me in India and she says, hey, guess what? We've now got this entire infrastructure to bring gas to the house. And I'm thinking, no, you're getting gas with the cylinders. That's pretty good. Wait till you can jump straight to electric cooking, because that will be better than making an infrastructure that you have to dismantle quite soon if you want to meet the targets. And to be honest with you, modesty works, and I think we have to be modest in the way we consume, in the way we develop. It's a different kind of modesty that I have, both in the global north and the global south, because otherwise our planet is doomed.
It is quite alarming. We had a big test in the last couple of years with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And in governments, we often don't plan very well. We had a dependency of 50% on Russian gas. And when that war broke out, the supplies were shut down, and Europe had to adapt really quickly. We should have planned better as governments, right? Not to be too dependent on one supplier of energy. But because there was a shortage in Europe, we did a test to our family and said, can we reduce our consumption by 15%? And it sounds like a simple thing, but it was easy by just being aware. And Gill, do you want to elaborate on this? Is like, what can we do to make a difference now? And then this microgrid, it's not being dependent on the huge central electricity system. You can build solar off-grid systems that's not connected to the central grid of a country. Can you elaborate?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I remember the situation like it was yesterday, because my electricity bill became much higher, very relevant. So for me, it was I was personally struck by this complication.
Sometimes it doubled, even tripled in some countries. Yeah.
It was more than that in Belgium anyway, which was a big problem. And a 15% saving, basically for us it was more like 50 50% that we have to reduce our energy consumption to actually mitigate a little bit the issue. And what I've seen, and so here's the thing about a competitive advantage. If you look at Europe as a continent, we are very much dependent. We are trying to build in solar panels. We are trying to build in windmills. But to be honest, the space that we have available is limited. The solar hours that we have is limited. And I think we should have focused on what we do best is innovation. And I've been seeing a lot of innovation on small modular reactors. Also,
which is nuclear energy, just for the audience.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's also a means to decentralize because they're modular. They can be built in more rapidly in terms of it compares to large nuclear reactors. And to be honest, it makes a lot of sense in Europe. And that's why I always think in a holistic way. You have to look at the region and you have to see what is available. And so that's...
I disagree on this issue because I think we can have a lot of solar panels in Europe and wind, and in fact we can manage the land because you can use the rooftops everywhere as long as you don't have a rule that says you must have only red roofs, which is a constraint in some cities.
You're absolutely right. But,
but otherwise you can use the rooftops, you can use the sides of the roads. Right. There's a lot of space.
However, the sun does not shine in the global north as much as in the south. That is for a fact.
Of course, but the solar panels are improving a lot, and I didn't have to pay anything because I was prepared, and when the war came, it was, I don't have to pay anything for my energy except the amount I paid for the panels.
Because you use solar.
And a heat exchange, so I don't need anything for heating either. So the problem is that you do make, at some point when you become a prosumer, you make money because you're not spending anything, and that's bad because you start over-consuming. And the question is, can you return it to the grid so that other people can use green energy? But I don't think that because we don't have enough sun and wind in the north, it excuses us from going renewable. No. I prefer that to nuclear.
That's absolutely, you're absolutely right. So we have to have a sustainable mix, and I'm absolutely agreeing on that. However, if you look at it from a pure holistic point of view, if I have to invest in solar panels, I would, as an investor, I would like to invest in solar panels where I can have the highest return. And the highest return as an investor is not in the global north. It's as simplified as I can say.
Yeah, and Africa, for example, has the greatest potential for solar energy as well, but it has to build the infrastructure to be able to take it in, which is very true. I'd like to open this up to the floor, because we have about 25 minutes left, and I think it'd be great to hear your views of what you heard so far, what questions are not answered about this energy transition, what do you think about what the responsibility is for the global north to fund the global south. So we have a hand right here in the middle. If you can stand up, it'd be great. And then just identify yourself, and I'd like to have you directed to one of the panel members. Do we have a second hand so we don't lose time? There's right there next to him, Leila. Yeah, there. And then we'll come to the gentleman in the second row, please. Just be very direct.
I'll be very direct. We talked about global south, global north. One of the things that wasn't discussed was how do you see the industry actually taking a step in making their energy use less? Because industry and production of all the products we use is one of the top tier. And the second one is data centers. So all the phones we use, all the electronics that's running here, that is a huge consumption of energy, and this is something that wasn't addressed in the panel. So I wanted to.
I'm glad you brought it up.
The question. Anyone on the panel?
Okay. No, perfect question. Inside the halls of the forum, they're all excited about AI and the capabilities it'll do, and to make the research much easier. The early indications that demand because of AI is going to go up 30 to 35%. And my biggest fear is that that'll be directed to the major technology companies of the world who are building small modular reactors and reaching in for nuclear energy. And I don't hear them talking about the Global South. Joyeeta, can you address that?
And not only that, they also are building their data centers in the Global South. And that's a real big problem. But my biggest fear is that we haven't been able to achieve our own energy in a renewable manner. And then to top it off, we're going to add this additional energy for AI. And of course, AI gives us faster technological answers, but it does not solve problems. So I see them at the UN saying, oh, we can solve all the SDGs, we can solve poverty. They cannot solve poverty. They can't solve food production. They can tell you what to do where, perhaps, and they are very dependent on the data that goes into those systems. So Cambridge University Press is asking all of us to submit our books to AI for free. And then when I, as a scientist, want to use AI, I have to pay for it. So I don't understand the logic also in the way AI functions, because AI is trying to take all the knowledge that they can get, all the music, all the art for free, and then create something for which they're going to charge you. So I have a very big problem with the way AI is being governed nowadays.
Good. We talked about the $300 billion loss and damage fund. If you saw the news yesterday, they made an announcement in the United States to invest $500 billion into AI development. Couldn't find money for the Global South,
Yep.
but they're willing to deploy $500 billion for AI development. Another question from the floor, please. And if you can identify where you're from, I think our panel would really appreciate it.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm from Mexico. I'm actually a student here in Geneva. And I would love to ask us, Scheltjens, sorry to pronounce.
No worries.
You mentioned a lot of business terminology. I'm a business student. And I thought, of course, blue ocean in the Global South makes a lot of sense, competitive advantage, in terms of it's not sustainable in the Global North. However, you did mention that there must be an industrialized buy-in, like from the Global North to the Global South. And in terms of what Selele mentioned, it seems a little contradicting because, of course, you want to move towards collaboration, but then what she says is governments in Africa, and especially South Africa, want black-owned industrialists, right? So if there must be a buy-in from the Global North, how does that, it's like a little bit contradicting. I understand that there must be collaboration, and hopefully you can discuss, like, how would you see that collaboration happening? But thank you. That's
good. No, it's very clear. Gill, I would love to have you address it, and then Ipeleng can. But you can have local partners. You know, the idea is you don't impose. But go ahead, Gill, please.
Exactly.
Yeah, what I was trying to mention is it's more capital funding. Basically, everything starts in industrialization or electrification, as what we are referring it to now. Everything starts with capital funding, and I think that's one of the major roles that the Global North has to play towards the Global South, supporting the developments that we are envisioning, and it has to be a win-win. What I'm not trying to say is that Global North it has to impose whatever we have to reach, or cleaning up the mess that we made as Global North, having our mess cleaned up by the Global South. That's absolutely not where I want to go to. But if we want to make energy affordable and accessible in the Global South, capital is required. And that's a matter of fact. And I hope that we learn from the mistakes that the Global North has made. And I do see a lot of win-win here, because there has to be some kind of a collaboration. And I think from a global, holistic point of view, I think this would benefit everyone.
Indeed. I think to add to that, and maybe just to underline your key point, a win-win partnership is key. And we have many positive examples. And I'll use myself as an example. So I'm a product of a support from Siemens Energy, which is a German entity that entered South Africa, and they built a power academy, right? Because I used to be on their board many years ago, and then I stepped down on their board. Now, they built a power academy, and this power academy incubates and supports small and medium enterprises in the energy space and also technology space, right? Of course, within the energy space. So there are many good examples of multinationals And these multinationals, by the way, they've been in South Africa for over 100 years. Remember, they also have been with us on the journey of apartheid, right? So we're at a point where they are so fair and in tune of ensuring that this win-win partnership actually does work. That's why I'm giving you very simple examples of saying we also work with other American firms, we also work with Chinese firms. So it can be done. I think the key thing, as I said, from our side is that we're crystal clear that never and never again, like Nelson Mandela said, that will go back. So would rather delay, because delay does not mean denial. All we're saying is it's very important that we live in an inclusive society that recognizes that we exist, and that even that partnership actually is going to take place with highly competent Africans and Black-owned entities. Because as I say, they've got the highest education. They also went to MIT, Harvard, INSEAD. So we always say we are going to partner on a fair basis, because even for us, that's what we mean by protecting our sovereignty, right? And two, it's got to be equitable and it's got to be fair, because again, it's a legacy issue. Our children and all our children in this room have got to look at us and say, when we existed and we're alive, we're responsible and we're fair and working well together.
Good. There was a bit of hypocrisy after Russia-Ukraine and before Russia-Ukraine. The narrative from the industrial banks, or the development banks, sorry, and from private industry is that we're not going to invest in those gas fields I was talking to you before because they're hydrocarbons. In fact, the World Bank had a ban on putting money into hydrocarbons.
And that's exactly why we cannot go according to that narrative, right?
Well, then we had the war, and then it was even worse than that, Ipeleng, because at the war, we had Germany go down to Africa and say, we'd like to finance your projects, but you have to export 100% of your production to us.
You see, and the coal...
That's not energy equity, right? And they had to shift off that position, but that was the narrative they tried to take to Africa yet again, actually.
And then they say we must decommission our coal-fired power plants. That was an interesting era, and that's why we've got to be wide awake. Yeah? We've got to be wide awake, and we are wide awake.
And realistic, I think is what you're saying.
Extremely.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had a question here from the second row, and then we have a question back there. Thank you very much.
Hello. Good afternoon. I'm from India, YP Singh. I'm a chartered accountant by profession and a chairman of a building construction infrastructure government company chairman. Very nice to hear all the panelists, and they have elaborated all the things. I belong to in India, and
sir, I got to get you your question, please. Directly to the question, please.
The theme is that the climatic change and the renewable energy. And I feel in India, the renewable energy is the initiative is very, very a good example for the rest of the world. We are having in India about 300 million houses total. And about 10 million houses in a year, the government is making the rooftops achievable. By way of ethanol, giving a lot of subsidies, and promoting the small startups and the small industrialists, as Selele told that the balance sheet and financing are not being, the financing is not made to the beginners. But in India, it's the initiative is by way of subsidy, giving the free loans, low rate of interest loans. It's making a good path for renewable energy. And for the rest of the world, it can be a solution, it can be an example. And we can take the example from India. My question is, because if we don't have the renewable energy, and why we are taking from the energy from the traditional paths like coal, thermal, etc., it is affecting a climatic change in the world. And my question is, there should be a global policy. The country who are not very rich, not able to put the renewable energy resources properly. The countries who are very rich, they can compensate the poor countries for giving a global electricity policy by way of renewable resources. It's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Number one, beyond the solar connections that you're talking about, they've done a terrific job in India with distributing LPG, the liquid gas for cooking homes, which has been a major breakthrough as well. So they're doing a lot, but they have 150 years of coal. They don't have carbon capture on their plants, by the way. And the question is why Joyeeta, I think it's a good one for you.
So
Why don't they support that transition in India?
So I think that if we really care about our kids worldwide, we have to find a way to finance the energy transformation in India as well as other countries. And we have to try to avoid the gas story. We have to try to go straight away from fossil fuel because we will get locked in.
In this case, it's even worse because it's coal. It's
Right.
40%.
So, and the problem for India, of course, closing down coal overnight is going to cost them more than a year's GDP. So it's a very expensive proposition. So the question I have is, how is it that we have so much money for AI, for going to the moon, for all kinds of technologies? Carbon capture and storage is an extremely expensive technology. So somehow our money is going in the wrong place. And even right now, a lot of the shareholders and the owners, the headquarters of fossil fuel factories in the global south are in the global north. So they're making money in the global south. And I feel that we have to figure out a different way to do this, and we have to work on a global energy transformation financed by the global north and by Indian and Chinese billionaires.
Good. Can I say to this current generation in the room, because I see it's mixed, but the youth don't accept it. You know, it's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable
even in the
for you.
COP process
No.
to say we can't afford to help in the transition. It's just not true. You had your hand up. We have a lot of questions. Please.
Annette Peter from Germany. A quick question on one aspect one might have to think about is energy security. Do you see an increased need to address energy security questions when the global south is like jump-starting into the renewable energy landscape by innovation, by way of investment? So, because in the global north, there tend to be many people tend to be afraid of the energy transition and tend to have a fallback solution in the form of fossil fuels when energy security is concerned. So that wouldn't be available in the global south. So there would be an increased need to have energy security solutions.
I think Ipeleng was suggesting that, is that you should have some hydrocarbons. My personal view, and I'm very involved in the sector, and Gill, you could disagree with me, is that you could bring in natural gas, but do it as efficiently and as clean as possible.
Yes.
Can you explain carbon capture and why you can do that for Africa, for Brazil, in your view? If you deploy a new natural gas plant and you have carbon capture, it's zero emissions, right? Can you explain that? Gill?
Yeah, absolutely. To be honest, natural gas applications are already a step up the ladder. So natural gas is combusted in a much cleaner way than coal or oil. So it's already a step up the ladder.
But you get locked in.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not an excuse, but it is still better than coal-fired plants.
Exactly.
Or oil.
Yeah, and again, as I said,
That's a fact.
As I said, it's got to be a step-by-step approach. And hence I say, you better be sober because you can get yourself entangled. I am not going to get to green overnight. The cost of technology is still expensive. The cost of borrowing money is still expensive. So what do? I look at what I possess. What do I possess? I've got grey hydrogen, right? And who came up with grey hydrogen? Our Sasol, South African entity called Sasol. We've got the Fischer-Tropsch technology. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start with what I can. Because in the meantime, I am working towards that just energy transition.
But I think the point here, Ipeleng, and I think that was the question as well, what is the role of the global north to facilitate? Joyeeta made that point very well.
Yeah.
Stefanie, you've been rather quiet, but you're very eloquent when you speak. What's your view on this in terms of making sure that Brazil has these huge natural and oil deposits? Is your view is that they use them, but make sure that Brazilians have access to energy, all Brazilians?
Yeah, I mean, the transition is going to happen slowly, and we already have like so much programs. I mean, we have now the Future Fuel program, which will help us to advance our capabilities in ethanol and more green fuels, which is going to be good. So
Offshore wind, for example?
offshore wind, yeah, of course. There's so much happening in Brazil right now, and
You went from Bolsonaro to Lula. They had very different visions of the future.
Yeah. We had so many incentive programs launched in Brazil right now, and so many tax incentives. That's why I keep going back to the point where investing in the global south is actually really profitable, and we need to do it now.
Great. Before we leave, you have to share the reforestation story, but not, we have so many questions. Please, in the back, and then you were very patient here. We'll come to you afterward, please.
Thank you. I'm Takwana Ngatane. I am from Lesotho. It's a small country inside South Africa, but not part of South Africa, a kingdom. My king is here. He'll be on one of the panels. We generate hydropower. We get electricity supply from South Africa's Eskom. We wanted to be independent and probably supply South Africa with wind power. But the country is so small that environmentalists were able to derail that effort by saying that we are endangering the bearded vulture. We understand and the environment and that we have to take care of the environment, but there has to be a balance. So what I want to ask the panel, what does Lesotho do to ensure that, as we see here in Europe, we are able to develop hydropower? Because yes, there will be negative impacts, but if we mitigate them, there is a way to ensure that we are able to both survive. So what does Lesotho do in this situation? Because it had offtake agreements and funding, but this funding was scared away by environmentalists. So what do we do? What do we do as world economy?
Yeah, there's the hypocrisy there too, because people are against some wind turbines, right? They don't want it in their backyard. Not in my backyard, NIMBY. I think the solution, we had a conversation at Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week last week, was to have grid interconnectivity in the African continent. So you have East Africa, South Africa, West Africa, North Africa, start to share their energy across borders. Lesotho is a unique case because it's small and it sits inside South Africa, but isn't that the best solution, to invest in the grid infrastructure so there is energy sharing, Ipeleng?
Yeah, it's very important that we invest in the grid, and I think we all understand that it's key to modernize the grid. And secondly, I think the historical timeline tends to be a bit longer, as you know, close to 10 years.
Yes.
For us to be able to achieve this. But nevertheless, it's quite important. But why is it important? Because it has to be accommodated into the grid, right? If you look at the renewables, and also the intermittency challenges that we have.
So basically, we're living on a 60-year-old, 70, 100-year-old grid structure.
Oh, yes. Oh, that's why
it needs to be modernized to take in this new energy.
That's it. And that's why in South Africa, we're on a big drive of raising money. And for those who are following the South African energy story, we've had to even split our power utility Eskom into 3 areas. Of course, make cost centers, generation, transmission, and distribution, to ensure that it is a standalone entity that focuses purely on transmission, because we realize that it's going to be a lot of hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for us to be able to achieve this. So
but this is where we could be effective in the global north, right? Modernize the grid so Africa, Latin America can share energy, right? Some or have abundant energy supplies like Brazil.
Yes, but I wanted to say to my fellow sister from Lesotho, because that's where my mother comes from and she was born in Lesotho, it is going to happen. And I think, again, as I said, being sober is also understanding that energy there's a lot of geopolitics. Energy is politics. So you've got to understand that. Because sometimes when you actually get the outcome of this thing doesn't work for this, also understand and unearth the rationale behind that. And I can tell you now, because energy is geopolitics, and which is why we've got to be a bit wiser and push that. So, and I know your king is here. That project is going to happen because the SADC needs it, Africa needs it, just like the DRC. So as I said, delay does not mean denial. So we've got to continue to soldier on. So it will happen.
Good. I can only take 2 more questions. She was very patient. And then this gentleman had his hand, but I'm going to ask you to be very quick. Please, thanks. Tell us where you're from too, please.
My name is Amelie. I'm from the Kantonsschule Baden.
Good.
And I have a kind of simple question for you, Miss. So we've heard how much money will be spent on AI and how you want to take a sober approach on development, especially in the BRIC states, in renewable energy. And my question is, how do you want to incorporate those two so you don't fall back in technologies how you have been in the past, in the history? So, yeah.
Yeah, how do you, because there's a real danger here. There's so much money in the global north going into AI that the digital divide and the energy divide goes wider. Joyeeta and Ipeleng, please, Joyeeta, very quickly.
Simply, I think that my personal view is we really have to manage the AI system in a way that we don't compromise on climate change. For me, climate change is an emergency, as is the biodiversity crisis. And we are in the 6th biodiversity extinction moment right now. So we really have to find a way to live with nature in harmony. And that basically means living modest lives, and I hope all of you can go and be much more modest in the way you live and in the energy you use. But in terms of AI, I know that the Global South may fall back, and I think the Global North should also be cautious about using AI, because AI is something that may come back to bite us.
Yeah, we're leaping in very fast.
We're leaping in very fast. We have no idea what it's going to do to us.
Yeah, we really don't yet, that's for sure. Ipeleng?
Again, why you have to be sober is that, like everything else in life, it has pros and cons. Whilst you might have fears about AI, it also presents a lot of opportunities, right? So let's be fair. It does have its challenges, but there are lots of opportunities, and for obvious reasons. So I think, in South Africa, we're already adopting AI. If you look at our renewables, we already have technology that is embedded in the projects that are being executed. If you look at green hydrogen, for instance, we are piloting some of our projects in green hydrogen, and we are using alkaline and PEM. And why is PEM important and why AI is embedded in that is because in South Africa, we even own platinum. And remember, we need platinum in at least the success of just energy transition. So one of those key things is we're taking advantage of our resources, using platinum, and of course, if we're using platinum in an electrolyzer plant to develop green hydrogen, technology has got to be part of it. It's a no-brainer. I think for me, it is at least when you are aware, which is why I believe in the knowledge economy. We've got to be educated, including business, by the way, even boards, because I sit on so many listed boards. Boards have got to be educated about the pros and cons of AI, right? Because also, I don't think it also helps for us to come across as so fearful, right? Yes, there are fears, but we can allay the fears by at least communicating the advantages of AI. So that's really my, again, sober approach.
Very quickly, Gill, yeah? And then we'll take one more question. We're a little bit, can we go a couple of minutes over? Okay, perfect. Thanks.
It's for the young audience. So on artificial intelligence, there is also a pitfall. And because the challenges that we are facing are requiring hardware solutions. Never forget that, because the problems that we are facing will not be solved by software. And I want to make that very clear. I want to push you all towards STEM, because hardware will be necessary whatever we do.
Yeah, and I'm praying actually that we have geoengineering that solves the intensity of global warming. No, it's going to need a breakthrough, and the hardware that Gill is talking about. Thanks for your patience. And the final question.
Hi, my name is Zach Needham from the International School of Zug and Lucerne, and I had a question directed at you, Gupta, because you spoke a lot about the global north helping the global south and maybe transitioning and skipping fossil fuels and going straight to sustainable energy sources. And I was wondering, what is the motivation for the global north to do this?
The motivation for the global north to do this is simply to make sure that the Arctic and the Antarctic doesn't melt. It's simply to make sure that it doesn't rain in one day, all the rain that you would normally get in a year. So every 1 degree rise in temperature is a 7% increase in evaporation. And that water just becomes so heavy, just comes down. Don't underestimate the impact of fires all over Europe, floods all over Europe, or in the United States. The United States has the most fires and floods right now as extreme weather events. So don't underestimate what climate change and biodiversity loss can do to your businesses in your entire supply chain. And he's absolutely right. You need hardware, and that hardware, you need all kinds of metals, and all that will require water and energy. We talked about AI. AI uses so much water, and globally, we really have a water problem. So, when we really think about the future, we have to think in a holistic, which means taking all the environmental issues into account. We have to live within that. So that's something we really have to think, because we have to give you a future. And northern kids will not have a future. I live in the north. Our kids will not have a future. Neither will we, if we don't really think about helping the global south address this problem without making them in bigger debts than they are currently.
Yes. You should be also aware, I chaired a session here in Davos, to complete the energy transition, we need 700% more of the strategic metals and minerals. So Ipeleng brought it up. It's going to be massive mining around the world. We have to do it in a very clean and just way because a lot of those assets sit in Latin America and they sit in Africa. But I don't think everybody realizes what that means to have 7 times more minerals, to have windmills, solar panels, battery storage, right? There's a lot taking place. I would, as the panel urged here, read as much as possible. It is the challenge of our lifetime. We're behind the curve. We had the Rio Summit in 1992. Nothing happened until the Paris Accord in 2015.
Yeah, 25 years later.
So demand more from your politicians, demand more from industry. It is the answer. And we don't want to put the burden on the next generation, but speak up about it because I find it the most urgent matter of our lifetime. Yeah. And we're not moving fast enough, I think. Yeah. I just want to thank Michelle, Leila, and the team from the World Economic Forum for convening such a terrific panel. I'm really impressed. I'm sure my panelists would say the same, but the questions that came from the audience, you really switched on. We're using the social media hashtag of hashtag WEF25. So when I said share your voice, please share your voice, right? And it's hashtag OpenForum25. So it's WEF25, hashtag also OpenForum25. So share your thoughts on this, what you learned, what you'd like to see. Send a message to those that are in the WEF here through Friday that you expect a little bit more from global industry and collaboration with governments, because it's that collaboration, as we said, could solve the problems. Can we give a nice round of applause to our panel? And thank you as well.